Here I am, ready for the next episode. Hold up. Wait. Actually, don't hold up. Let's get this. Let's just get this rolling. Cause you know what? It's like a nostalgia episode. That's what I'm about to do. About to drop it like it's hot. Welcome back to Finding Your Identity. This is Derek McKinney, and this is episode 33. And I had some stuff, some things were going on, and so I was away for a little bit. But I'm back now with episode 33. Ready for the next episode. Hold up. Wait. Yeah, so we're going to talk about some throwback type of stuff. And I was listening to this new song that came out, and it was inspiration for this episode, and it was a pretty cool song called Old Me by 5 Seconds of Summer, and this is a little bit of it. Shout out to the old me and everything he showed me. Glad you didn't listen when the world was trying to slow me. No one could control me. Left my lovers lonely. Had to work it up before I really got to know me. All right. That's like a little bit of a lead-in, kind of a throwback. And I think back mainly because this episode is actually going to be about peer pressure. And to some degree, there's a little bit of the psychology side of how you kind of act differently around different people. So, you act differently around your parents versus how you act around friends. As you get older, those kind of blend together, but there's some interesting psychology that goes into that. And, there's some reasons actually why that's the case. But I just think back to when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and, how I acted like a knucklehead, and I wasn't ashamed to act like a knucklehead, and that's shameful, But I guess it all helped to contribute to build into my character that I have now. But, there's some things that I guess I'm not proud. No, not I guess, but I know I'm not proud of some of the things that I did when I was younger and a knucklehead. So, I just I mean, this isn't supposed to be an episode where I'm like confessing to my sins or going on an apology tour or something like that. It's just this one of these things that that song I was listening to just kind of got me thinking about my childhood or my younger years, and how different I was around different people, and also how the peer pressure drove some of my poor decision making. So I figured I'd do an episode about it because it's interesting, and I mean, you might find it interesting, and everybody does it. Everybody essentially has this in their psyche to kind of act differently. You'll act differently around your boss, versus acting differently around your children, or acting differently around your spouse, differently around your friends, differently around strangers, differently around strangers that you start to know better because you might be in a situation where you're stuck with several strangers for a long period of time, like if you do jury duty. So just a couple thoughts. I'm going to do this episode about that, and I'm going to get started in a minute. So we jumping into the meat of this then. All right. Not to get into the weeds too quickly, but in psychology, there's a term called schema. So let's just get the big words out of the way, right? Right off the bat, jumping into it. Schema is actually used as kind of a way to describe indexing of your thoughts. And, that kind of, and how it kind of relates to relationships. But if you just think of it as like a filing system, folder structure, directory structure, what have you, where you're essentially, you know, setting ideas and thoughts and feelings and in your brain into different sections into, so you're categorizing, right? And so you categorize all these different things, and you kind of end up, the concept of it within relationships is where you can end up categorizing different feelings and emotions and behaviors with different people. So that concept where I was talking about, you essentially acting differently around different people, and that concept is really just that you have a kind of an established template for how you're going to act in a certain situation or around those certain people. So, for instance, you're going with your friends to a party, and these are friends that are well known, and you feel comfortable around them, and so you're going to say your silly jokes or your, shoot from the hip comments, your shot from the hip comments, but you're going to be comfortable around them because your friends will laugh at you and they're more forgiving, and you don't feel any kind of pressure to live up to any kind of standards, but you're on your way to the party. But then you get to the party and you're now surrounded by not so close friends, right? So these are more like acquaintances, and you're a little bit more careful how you might come across with a joke, and you might end up having those little exchanges with your friend with looks or under the breath comments, where you've got the inside joke, and you feel like you've got somebody there who's, your tether to, I guess, your real life or the real you, but you don't fully expose yourself because you're being cautious, and you don't want to embarrass yourself, so you're not completely open, right? So that's kind of how it is. But you could start to warm up to the other people, and then maybe as you slip and say a funny joke that you or something you thought was funny but you don't think is something that you should have just told the stranger, but then that stranger kind of laughs at it and thinks it's hilarious, and it's like there's a kinship forming all of a sudden, and you guys have something in common, and everything is funny, and now it's the three of you, and blah blah blah, la la la, ha ha ha, laughing at the party. Yeah, I don't know if that's actually how it went down. I didn't go to a ton of parties when I was younger. Well, yeah, I don't know. Party scene wasn't really my thing. Definitely went to like parties, but see, the problem is I really wasn't into drinking, and a lot of times that was what the kids were just doing at the party, so I just didn't go, or I kind of hung out with a few people at first until things got a little crazy, and then I took off or whatever. But or if I went with like a girl, it was like a girlfriend or something like that, then we just kind of hang out, and that was different. But I don't know, the situation might be slightly, or it might be severely different between boys and girls, as you're growing up. But I definitely remember there were moments, even within my circle of friends, because it was, tighter friendships towards the center of the circle, and as you kind of went out, and there was acquaintances, or the common situation where you had a friend of a friend because your friend brought one of their older friends from their past, and then you kind of got introduced, and it was kind of like they got that was their ticket in. They got to play the friend card in a sense, this new acquaintance, but they kind of got in, and then sometimes it'd be awkward or they really tried to lean into the jokes a little bit too hard, or act like they knew the inside jokes, or they'd may pick up on some of those cues of the inside jokes, but you're like, I don't know who you are. You're not one of us. You need to back up, or know your role, or know your place, But as that person maybe comes around more often, days, months pass, and next thing you know, he's like one of your friends. And like I have a good friend where it kind of started in a strange way like that. It was a friend of a friend, and that friend was friends with him because his what is this? His old best friend dated this guy's sister. Somehow that's how the relationship started. But then, these two friends became friends over the other friend because the other friend fell away, and it's, all the funny relationship stuff that happens with friends. But he started coming around more, and so then it was, then the three of us. But I had this other friend who I was a little bit closer to at the time, and I was hanging out with that one more often. So like as a group, we'd all hang out, but we wouldn't hang out separately until we got to know each other more. And then it was like, okay, then the two of us would end up becoming friends and hanging out on our own, without the friend that introduced us. And relationships are complicated, man, I'll tell you, because it's, there's definitely like slight imbalances that could all of a sudden cause you to no longer be friends, and you fall out of favor with them, or they fall out of favor with you, or something happens to kind of cause a rift because there's, always drama. Could be females got in between you, or, another friend got in between you, or who knows, lots of things. But you go through lots of friends, but then, you'll find that the ones that are still around and you can still talk to and reach out to after 30 something years, those are the ones that are, those are the ones that you just knew at the time were your friends. And it's kind of cool. And those relationships kind of fill out over time and evolve, and you grow apart. You get old. I say get old, but you get older, you get married, you have kids, and next thing you know, you don't have things as much in common. You start moving around for work, or mostly for work, but you can still call them up or text them, and they're still there. And that's how you know you've got a good friend. But how you act around them, it's also funny how you can kind of fall, for people that well, like your family, like your brothers or cousins, or, these close type friends that I was talking about. It's amazing how you can just fall back in and almost pick up where you left off with them. And it's how they, they trigger like those inside jokes are still fresh when you start, you get back together and you're chatting for a little bit. And then, next thing you know, you're bringing up memories, and the next thing you know, you've got your inside jokes running again, and you're just thinking how it's like nothing ever changed, and it's kind of cool. And that's how, and that's your brain, the part of your brain, these schemas that I was talking about is, that was like a categorized section of your brain where you had these thoughts and ideas and feelings, and you were able to just draw back upon them, and they were there. You hadn't thought about them in years, but you were able to draw them back up, and you have, something that gives you that good nostalgic feeling. And you think of the old you, the old me, and think about how things were different. Like I can think back to the neighborhood I grew up in, where I really met, these friends that I talk about. And there was a period of time where it was like that was all that mattered. You'd go to school, but you'd come home from school and it'd be the same group of friends, and you'd be, playing all the games together. And, in our neighborhood at the time, it was, a few blocks, and in those few blocks, we knew every square inch of it for the most part, except for the yards where they had vicious dogs that you couldn't cross into those yards. But you knew the fence line really well, and you knew where to stay away. But you knew them well. Like you cut through certain backyards to go to a friend's house, or to try to catch the bus or something. Where everybody gathered to play basketball, because, a couple people had hoops, but some of the hoops or the driveways had better space for the hoops. Some of the hoops had areas where the neighbors didn't yell as much at you for playing basketball in the middle of the day. Then there were the streets that were the dead-end streets that were perfect for wiffle ball games, because, you could not have to worry about cars running you over. And, then there were the fields that were perfect for football. And you know, it's kind of cool to, like, even now as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking back and I can, clearly picture all these different locations and the kids that I was hanging out with. And it's kind of fun. And that's, me kind of drawing upon these different indexed schemas in my brain. And the the big thing to me is how it can, it's how it's triggered, and another thing that's kind of interesting, is how things can get triggered by music, or a smell. That's kind of cool. Smell is like that funny one. And actually smell is the one sense that can have the most effect on triggering memories. But, I smell apples, like baked apples, and I think of my grandmother's house and fresh, baked apple pies, or I think of sometimes the taste. Like I taste peanut butter, and I can think of peanut butter fudge, and just like that kind of trigger is just really cool. That smell, sense of smell, or that smell is what's actually triggering something in your head. And I think the human brain is pretty impressive, as we probably know all too well. And, even farther beyond that, just how you might end up with your partner for life, your spouse or significant other, is sometimes largely based on smell. And what's interesting, an interesting fact, is that some scientists believe that it was actually smelling a potential mate, that actually led to kissing, and kissing as a way of judging a potential mate, because the primal instincts were to get close, to sniff, to get to determine the scent that the potential mate had. And so they'd get close to every part, and then they'd get close to the lips, and then it'd be, kissing would be actually, trying to taste in a sense, taste the mate. And so that's kind of a powerful like thing if you think about it, being able to, it's not so much judging somebody based off of a conversation. Like imagine these people, or yeah, people, they're people, I was to say, or creatures, but the primal creatures that we evolved from, imagine they really couldn't communicate very easily, but they could decide that somebody would be a good, partner by getting close enough to just smell them and then taste them or kiss them. And you have to imagine that people smelled pretty funky when they could not shower regularly, or even had a concept of what bathing was. So that's kind of an interesting determination. Do you go off of how bad, this person smells the worst, so they're the best, or they smell the best, so they're the best? Like, I don't know how that would actually work. And then that's a scary tangent I don't want to go down, because it's definitely nice to have to be around people that don't smell. Yeah, it's a nice feature. And then you have those very awkward times, especially at work, when you've got a stinky person, and somebody's got to be the person to break it to the stinky person that they're stinky. And I remember actually working with a guy who probably had halitosis or something, but had horrible breath, just horrible breath. And everybody occasionally has a moment where they have horrible breath, and they, maybe they don't know it, or maybe they do, and they're trying to, keep it away from you. This guy would come and talk to you like an inch away from your face with this funky breath. And it was kind of a running joke amongst some of the other people, because we'd offer him gum and he would refuse. Like, I don't need any gum. You do need gum, but it was like, how do you break that to somebody because he was so overly confident, so confident that he didn't feel any. Well, he also had boundary issues, but he didn't feel any reason to not stand so close to you when he was having a conversation with you, like way too comfortable. But oh my gosh, the stink that came out of that guy's mouth was horrible. And I felt bad because you have to wonder like what was going on, and it's kind of sad because it's like, we couldn't help but joke about how like we didn't want somebody, want to we didn't want to have a face-to-face conversation with the guy. But then there was a period of time where there was, one of the people, it was a small office, there was about 5 or 6 of us. One of them was brave enough to actually suggest that he eat some gum or brush his teeth, because I guess they just got really tired of it. And then it became like really awkward. And it was like, well, we tried to make light of it to get through it. And it's a work environment, so, you don't want to like offend somebody. And oh my gosh, it was a hot mess. It smelled like hot garbage. But that's interesting though, bringing it back around to the whole sense of smell, nostalgia, but also could be the determination of who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, which is kind of scary. You better hope that you don't have a cold that day. And then, of course, there's sounds. You might. I like to actually think. So I paused for a second because I'm thinking of the sound of the ocean. But it's really what's fascinating is if you listen to a big seashell or conch or whatever you call it, and you can almost hear that sound of the ocean and how it makes you feel like you're close to the ocean. But how sometimes you can almost smell a sea breeze when you do that. That's kind of crazy. And so that one's just multiple senses kind of working together. So, and it's funny because so this is just kind of another random thought, but how, if you ever watch how the special effects are done on movies, specifically like how sounds are done, how, and I was watching Brain Games on Netflix, and I think it was probably the first episode or second episode, but they were talking about how they were doing that Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie, how they were making the sounds of the burgers falling out of the sky and just landing all over the streets and all over, the land. And they were just using like wet paper towels, like just with the right amount of density of wetness slapped against like pavement or cement. And the way that they were slapping it and then sliding it is what made that sound. Because, you can't really know. It wasn't like they were going to go out and they were going to go get a whole bunch of burgers, thousands of burgers, and dump them from an airplane onto a dock and stuff just to try to figure out what the sound is. That's not cost effective. But, so they were doing the sound effects by just kind of matching sounds. And, some types, somebody cracking their neck or something like that to like, crack their neck to get loose. Like they were using celery, snapping celery. And so that's kind of an interesting like brain trick right there, brain game, because, you're watching it and you're thinking, bones are cracking, muscles are cracking, whatever, as your joints are popping, but it's celery that's actually snapping, that's creating the sound. But you don't see the celery cracking, and you can, clearly you can see the actual cartoon character, and it happening to the cartoon character. So that's enough. That's enough to let your mind basically fill in the blanks. And so, again, your brain's pretty powerful. There's other things like taste. Sometimes, you might taste something and get nostalgia. Like me, like tasting peanut butter makes me think of the peanut butter fudge. Jelly Belly jelly beans. That's just like I don't even know. That just seems like a something faulty. That seems something like faulty in this world, but and I mainly say that because there's like a booger flavor or a poop flavor, or buttered popcorn flavor in a jelly bean that stuff's kind of nuts. But the fact that you can, eat something like that and then it can bring back memories. The smell of buttered popcorn makes you think of the movies, right? Sometimes kettle corn makes me think of an amusement park, Sometimes that funky music that the carousel plays, you might hear that music and then think of a carousel it's a carousel, right? Yeah, the horses spinning around. I think that, yeah, it's a carousel. I get those confused. Ferris wheel, carousel. Sometimes that music triggers thoughts, but it's all kind of interesting things. And I think that's, kind of fascinating. Now I'm going to take a break and then I'm going to come back and talk about peer pressure. Maybe I won't. You can't pressure me into doing anything I don't want to do unless you're a friend. Peer pressure is tough. Peer pressure is definitely a very prevalent thing when you're younger, although it can happen when you're an adult, Sometimes, I think maybe, people you're working with, coworkers or something like that, maybe that it's a positive peer pressure to, help to get you to aspire to be better or something like that, But I'm thinking, as a youth, that's tough. It's tricky because it's there and you have to learn how to deal with it. And sometimes you're not mature enough to really know how to deal with it. So that can be tough, and in terms of peer pressure, from a psychological perspective, there's actually two types. There's active peer pressure and passive peer pressure. The active is pretty much the scenario you would think of, where you've got a couple friends who are all like drinking or want to go, I don't know, it's not always bad necessarily, but all want to go to the movies, and you don't really want to go to the movies, but they're all like, come on, let's go to the movies, and they're trying to sell you on it, and they do. And same thing as if they try to convince you to try drinking or something like that. And that's where you really need to develop strong morals, and you definitely need to know what you want going into the situation. Hopefully your parents did a good job teaching you that you shouldn't do certain things, especially if the things can hurt you. So if you're lucky, that'll let you help guide you, I should say. And even if you're older, which I suspect is not probably no teenagers listening to this episode of this podcast, maybe, but they're being forced to by somebody, I'm sure, by peer pressure. No, that's how I want to get the word out about this podcast. Go demand that your friends listen to an episode. Yes, but in all seriousness, from a parent perspective, it's something you have to be aware. You obviously know it. You went through it. You went through the peer pressure, but you have to understand that, you got to be careful not to drive a kid in the direction of the friends. You got to, at least, one of the parents should really help to put the perspective and teach them good lessons, and the other should help to reinforce it. But, the main thing is that it's just kind of leading by example. Like, at the very least, just don't do anything that's wrong. Like, I shouldn't say wrong, but don't do illegal things. Or if you don't want your kids to smoke, don't smoke. If you don't want your kids to drink, don't drink, kind of thing, and just doing on a daily basis the good things in life that you would like your kid, to be how you like your kids to act. Now, being stubborn might come through and be a little bit harder to hide from your kids, and then your kids might end up being stubborn. But you do your best. I try to do my best, but you can have a talk about that kind of stuff with your kids. There's no reason to be afraid to have a conversation about peer pressure and having them understand. And you can do it, when they're young, like young enough to understand it. you don't have to wait until they're a teenager, and you definitely don't want to wait until it's too late. So you have the conversations just to try to make them aware that it's going to happen, you know? And sometimes you'll see it, you know, you might be just in the peripheral of the kids, you know, the teenager or whatever, and you might see it happening, and then you can kind of point it out and be like, you don't have to do that, you know? Like you didn't have to go to the movies, or you don't have to go to the movies if you don't want to, kind of thing, because you want to make sure that they are establishing boundaries with their friends. Then there's the passive peer pressure. You know, that is more, you know, you pick up the behavior without it being verbally expressed, and it is one way, you know. So you might actually, you know, so put yourself in the teens, you know, the teens perspective. They're in school. Here's a big one in this day and age, and it has to do with cell phones. So, you know, your kid might not have a cell phone and be hanging out with other kids and seeing the other kids, and they're talking on their cell phones or texting on their cell phones, or they're talking about their new cell phones or whatever it is, and they're just kind of off on the side at that point. Maybe their friends don't all have cell phones, or their friends don't, you know, maybe their friends are respectful or polite enough to not be on their phones when they're with their friend who doesn't have a phone, and or just, you know, being friends and chatting. But there's other kids around who do have them, and so that ends up, you know, being an influencer, because it makes them think, oh, I need a cell phone, because all the kids, it seems like every kid I look at has a cell phone, you know. It's like that, the concept of you know, those things that go like crazy viral, like a slap bracelet, or I don't know, jewelry or something, whatever, you know. It could just be that the kid saw another kid or saw a couple kids with something, you know, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's the new thing, we need it, you know. That happens with clothing, you know, shoes, I mean, and that happens with adults, you know. And sometimes it's kind of like you might be influenced by other adults because you saw them wearing a nice shirt or a jacket or whatever might be happening in your life that you see, you know. You're kind of being passively influenced or passively pressured, you know. Or you may have a scenario where, you know, your kids are pressuring you to buy them some kind of Christmas gift, and then you start to hear on the news that these things are selling out like crazy. This is the hottest Christmas item of the season, and you need to go jump on that bandwagon and get that thing quickly, and so then you fall into that trap of being, you know, passively pressured. So it's kind of it's an interesting thing. It's another psychological thing. You know, one of the things that I remember studying in college that was really interesting was like consumer behavior, because you're definitely influenced by other people. I mean, not only are commercials reinforcing it, but then you see a celebrity promoting something and you think, oh, I want that because, you know, this celebrity had it. You know, that's the worst sometimes when you see like people just getting it because a celebrity had it, you know, or one of those famous for being famous type people, like a Kardashian, whatever, whoever's trendy at the time. But you know, they they make a living off of people like following what they do and then buying their stuff, you know. And that's a type of social pressure. I would say peer pressure. I mean, peer pressure is really has to do with your friends, you know, your close knit friends being an influence on you. But there is such a thing as social pressure. You know, you're often pressured by what you see around you. You know, there's also like that strange effect, which I forget what the term is. Maybe it's kind of like placebo, but it's not really placebo. Can't think of the word, but you know, it's that idea. I think it's called like hysteria. Well, hysteria is the thing, but it's like related to hysteria, where you know, if one person starts freaking out because of something, and let's say you're all at like an amusement park, and for some reason, somebody starts freaking out because they say, oh, somebody was infected with some disease. I don't know, coronavirus, which is very, very prevalent right now. It won't be probably next year or something, but it used to be SARS or MERS or Black Plague, but right now coronavirus. So that in itself could create some kind of panic and hysteria, but the thing that I'm thinking of is where hysteria. It's like hysteria driven illnesses, and I forget. I think it might have been a Malcolm Gladwell podcast actually, where he was talking about a kid drank some soda and then some Coke specifically, and then threw up, and then another kid who had drank the Coke thought they were sick too and started throwing up, and a whole bunch of people were throwing up, and it was all these kids were just throwing up all over the place, and it was like it was related to hysteria because they went back and they actually tested and they found there was nothing wrong with the Coca-Cola. So it just happened to be this kind of this hysterical outbreak that everybody psychologically thought something was wrong with the Coca-Cola, and then they got sick, and I find that kind of fascinating. It's also where if one person starts running from something, like if you start running from something and then somebody else starts running from something, and you don't see what they're running from, but you feel the sense that there's like a danger and there must be running for some reason, you might start running away from something, and there may be nothing there, but you've just like convinced the other person just by your actions that they should run. And that's another thing. It's like it's just the fascination, or I'm fascinated by this, like how psychologically we can be completely affected by strangers for all intents and purposes, so it's interesting stuff. But back to peer pressure. Now, the peer pressure is a problem because obviously it's a problem, but when it comes to addiction, substance abuse, it can be a lot worse, because if these kids' friends, or let's say your kid or your daughter, if her friends are doing drugs or drinking or something like that, just by the virtue of hanging out with them, like there's a higher chance that your daughter or son or whatever is going to start doing drugs, or drinking, because it's going to be hard for them, especially if that's how they are, it's a way that they're bonding together, because they're, they've kind of, this is something to do. So you definitely have to have those conversations with your kids, to establish that this stuff is bad way before this would ever happen, and explain, this is not a good thing, and you shouldn't, partake in this, and you also shouldn't associate with people that do, because as much as you may, you might have grown up with these kids and then they just went down the wrong path. It's hard to sever those ties, but you almost have to, because if you start kind of falling in with them, like it's just going to lead to bad situations. You might be, the kid might be strong enough to avoid it, but they might end up in really scary situations. They might be called by this friend to pick them up from a party that's put them in a dangerous position, and then the kid is now potentially in a dangerous position. So it can be scary stuff. You got to be careful. But I thought there's a couple things that were interesting about peer pressure in general, and that there was some tests, like these experiments done on related to peer pressure. And one of those experiments was where essentially there was a peer who was giving incorrect answers to a vision test, and then the other peer was basically giving incorrect answers to match those of the peer. And what was fascinating about it is when there was just one friend that was there, one peer, it didn't happen as often, but when they got up to 4 peers, it found that was when that was the strongest influence was happening at that time. And and then they found that when they went beyond 4 peers, it never got any stronger. There wasn't any higher of an influence. So it was like the 4 peers was the magic number in order to influence this other person to report incorrectly on purpose. So that was kind of interesting. Now, the other test that other experiment that I saw was that this history teacher had designed an experiment, and they designed it to teach students about the appeal of fascism. And the teacher progressively implemented more totalitarian and disciplinary and strength-oriented measures in the classroom. And by the 4th day of it, all the students were essentially ready to join the fascist movement. And, it's because, the teacher was in a position of authority and power, and it was able to influence the students. I don't know enough specifics about the actual age range of the students, but, I think it does have something to do with their age. They were kind of on the younger side, not like, maybe middle school or early high school is my guess. Not kindergarteners, because that'd be pretty messed up. And, on that note, age can have an effect on the pressure. Like, I feel like, younger kids aren't susceptible to peer pressure, but if they're under the wrong influence, they may learn wrong. They might learn the wrong things because that they don't really necessarily know any better at that period, but they're less likely to care so much about their friends. To some degree, they still kind of care what their friends say, but I guess I like that there is that age up until before middle school where it feels like kids can be kids and be silly and act like dopes and be really kind, and it's not under the microscope that you are under as you kind of get into the teen years. That's sad, but it's important to just know these things because, as you kind of grow up, you kind of grow away from that. But if you have children, you kind of want to help guide them away from that because it's, it'd be important for them, important life lesson for them. Now, in terms of peer pressure in adults, I think one of the biggest ones, ones that I can directly relate to, and I talked about this in an episode, I talked about quitting smoking, but it's smoking. As adults, you're not necessarily being peer pressured into smoking, but you kind of are being peer pressured into not stopping smoking, because you might hang out with adults that all smoke, and then it's like it becomes part of your ritual or your routine to go out for a smoke break with them, especially at work. And so now that becomes kind of a problem. Now you're essentially, you don't want to miss out on the social event of smoking. And I mentioned this in that earlier episode I did about quitting smoking, called Breaking Habits. And, how I made that joke about how Rachel, felt the need to go, Rachel from Friends. Rachel seems like a strange name to just throw out there if I don't put any context, but the Friends episode where Rachel, pretended to take up smoking because she felt like she was missing out on important work discussions. But that's a real thing. And so there is, to some degree, you got to worry about peer pressure as you get older. Or you might even feel, peer pressure. You might feel the social pressure or the peer pressure just by, where you happen to live. Actually, it's funny because I could think of, there's almost this pressure in the neighborhood I live in to put out bags with candles on Christmas Eve. And, you got to buy the candles from one person in the neighborhood who's organizing this. And it's not like they're super expensive. I think it's like 50 cents a bag, and they give you a bag with a candle, and but they want you to light up your whole sidewalk, and you might have to buy 100 bags. But it's like there's this unwritten pressure to do it, because you feel like you're going to be letting the whole neighborhood down if you don't buy the bags. And the funny thing is this year we forgot, and we're just not susceptible to peer pressure apparently, or we're just we don't care that much, my wife and I, so we just didn't do it, but mainly because we forgot to put the order in time. And we happened to drive around the neighborhood on Christmas Eve to see the bags, and we saw the house that's like diagonally across from the house where the lady organized this, and they used brown paper bags, and all the bags that this lady sells are all white, and it seemed like a clear, I don't want to conform to the neighborhood. You're not going to tell me what kind of bags I put out on my lawn on Christmas Eve and with candles, and it was just kind of funny. It was subtle, but it was funny. And there's that kind of weird peer pressure, or there might be peer pressure to do activities for your kids or something like that, where you might find if your neighbors are putting their kids in all these different activities, and you're just thinking like, I don't want to have to do this, don't really have the money to do this, but the kid is almost feeling like they're missing out, and then you start to feel bad for the kid, and then all of a sudden you're kind of falling to pressure to try to get your kid to be in the same activity as like a neighbor's kid, so there's those kind of pressures, and it happens. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it happens. It's easy to be influenced, you might find when you're shopping, you might end up being influenced. Well, that's on purpose. That's marketing. But I was going to say, you go to the grocery store, you're influenced to buy certain things. But it might be that you happen to bump into, a mom or dad from school, or a neighbor or something like that, and you see them buying healthy food or something. I don't know. This wouldn't happen to me, or I don't know anybody that this would happen to, but maybe you feel the pressure to buy some organic food or something like that, Actually, more than likely, it's when you're leaving and there's a Salvation Army jingler guy, and, you see people donating money to them, and then you feel obligated to donate money because you saw them do it and they saw you, and then they'll look back to see if you donated the money. And so now you've got some peer pressure, or social pressure to do that. Or even better, and you could hear the frustration in my voice, I bet. But I'm just in a town where it just seems like, I don't know. The word excess comes to mind, but the way that they donate to certain causes kind of irks me, because and then it's almost like you feel like you're getting some kind of social pressure to donate for things that you wouldn't think are that important, like high tech industrial lights or something, versus you don't have enough chairs or something for the classroom. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being ridiculous. I don't want to really name specifics anyways, but it just kind of feels like sometimes you're getting pressured to put your money towards things that don't really matter, bottom line. So I have to kind of mention that. But that to me tends to be certain kind of locations, depending on where you are. But you definitely will experience it as an adult. And it's all, there's a whole psychological reason for it, because you're kind of going through life not completely on your own. As much as you feel like you're independent, you make your own decisions, which is true, but you're still influenced by other people. And you're influenced to make decisions because you've had exposure to something. It's not like you just crawled out from under a rock after 30 years and then, you're just like, I'm going to go to the grocery store. Well, no, that's probably not an example. I'm trying to think of a good example of something you might be like if you were complete. It's hard to imagine because like you might see people who I don't know, they have like maybe drive certain cars or maybe they buy certain products. Like maybe you feel like I don't want to buy you know a cheap cell phone. Like I want to I want a good cell phone because you feel that pressure to get a good product. Sometimes that's because you're actually doing a review of your peers, like you're actually polling and doing research, and you find that they find that this particular cell phone is the best one to do. But you also might feel this pressure to purchase it. Maybe it's like TVs, with guys or something. Something it feels like I got a 55-inch or a 50-inch, or I got a 60-inch or a 65-inch, or I have an 85-inch TV, and then you're like, oh, you got TV envy, because you go over to their house and you're like, oh, they got a 85-inch TV and it's crystal clear, and I can see the pimples on the quarterback's face, but there's that kind of influence that's again back to that whole like consumer behavior thing where you're being influenced by other consumers to exert a certain kind of behavior. Like, oh, it's in your head now. Oh, I'd really like that. I'd really like an 85-inch TV. I've got no wall that would actually realistically fit on, but I'll make it work, because 85 inches and I got to have it. Or maybe it's shoes or other technology, like people are starting to get camera systems, and it's like, oh, well, what kind of camera system should I get? Or you just happen to go to someone's house, like, you just see stuff. You just see other people have things. They got this new robot lawnmower. Oh, I want one of those robot lawnmowers, You have a ton of examples. There's tons of examples of you're just being influenced by other people and their purchases. Or you're feeling guilty for not donating to the Salvation Army. Whatever it is, there's pressure all around. But remember, pressure busts pipes. And that's the word of the day that I'm going to leave you with. Because I have nothing else that I want to say about this. And that's all I got to say about that. And yeah, so that went well. All right. Thank you again for listening to Finding Your Identity. And I will be back in the future with another episode. But at this rate, it seems like they're turning into once a month because I just haven't had a ton of time. And I've got other stuff on my mind and on my plate that I've been working on. And I'm sorry. But just seems to be how life is. Sometimes life is life. And thanks for listening. Until next time, this is Finding Your Identity.